Hey, this is Tom from MVP Chess. Welcome back to my series on Bobby Fischer's seminal work, My 60 Memorable Games. In this video, we'll be analyzing game number 52 that Fischer played versus Nicholas Rossolimo in the 1965 U.S. Chess Championship. Before we jump in, though, don't forget to smash that subscribe button and join Team MVP. Thanks for your support. So, Nicholas Rossolimo was a Russian-born grandmaster who eventually emigrated to the United States and lived in New York City. In addition to being a world-class chess player, he also drove a taxi cab in New York City, which is how he paid his bills. Of course, you must be familiar with Rossolimo's name for the variation of the Sicilian defense, which bears it, meeting two knight c6 with bishop b5, the so-called Rossolimo variation. So in this encounter, Fischer had the white pieces and plays e4, best by test, of course. And we have a French defense, which did pose Fischer some problems throughout his career. After knight f6, bishop g5, bishop b4, we have the McCutcheon variation on the board. Now, it looks as though black has just blundered a piece to e5, but just like the semi-Slav, black can wiggle out of this jam by counterattacking this bishop on g5 with pawn to h6. Now, Fischer decides to retreat the bishop back to d2. If he had captured this knight on f6, he'd be up a pawn momentarily, but black's going to be able to recapture that pawn in short order and would just be left with the bishop pair, and in particular, an unopposed dark squared bishop. Definitely not what white wants. That's why Fischer dropped this bishop back to d2. We have a capture on c3. Fischer recaptures with the b pawn. This is really important, anticipating the thematic c5 break from black in the French defense. He wants to bolster and reinforce his center. Knight e4 and queen g4. Just like we also see in the Winnower variation, queen g4 is a good idea in the McCutcheon variation as well. The bishop has come to the b4 square and has vacated the king side, so very often white can provoke a weakening of black's king position, which we see here with pawn to g6. Fischer continues with development and challenges this knight, and we have a capture on d2. Now, Fischer's king did lose the right to castle, but it is very safe in this position for a couple reasons. One, we have a locked central pawn structure. That means this position is not opening anytime soon, so the king's not going to come under any fire. And number two, look at the great pawn cover that Fischer's king has around it. Almost forms a really hard shell of pawns. Black's going to have a really hard time breaking through. So Fischer's king, even though it's in the center of the board, it's totally safe. c5, knight f3, knight c6, and then we have queen f4 from Fischer. So what's this move all about? Well, if you look at the position, you can see Fischer's pawn structure is pointing towards the king side. This is where he should be seeking his play. That's where he's going to be strongest. So the queen moves out of the way to allow the h pawn and the g pawn to race down the board and try to create some weaknesses on the king side. So we have queen c7, and Fischer continues his plan with h4 and then g4. Just as we talked about, playing on the side of the board where he is strongest. Notice he's not doing anything on the queen side. That's where black's strongest. You want to play on the side of the board where you are strongest. And a good way to identify that side of the board is with your pawn structure. So we have c takes and c takes. Now we see the virtue of recapturing on c3 with the b pawn. Fischer's able to recapture on d4 with a pawn, maintain this great center, and in particular, this strong point on e5. Knight e7, Fischer recaptures on g5, and now is left with a really nice protected passed pawn that he's going to look to potentially push down the board later in the game. Now, Fischer plays a really nice move in this position, bishop b5. And you might ask yourself, why is he playing that? Doesn't that just allow black to play bishop d7? Trade off the so-called bad French bishop? Not so fast. After this exchange, we can see Fischer would have a really nice move in this position. Pawn to e6, boom. And after queen takes, The E file has opened really fast. Black's king is stuck in the center of the board, and white's rook activity is going through the roof. That's why Rossolimo didn't want any part of that. He just ducked the king to the side, king f8, and Fischer just brought his bishop back to d3. The damage has been done, and the bishop really belongs on the d3 square. So, unlike Fischer's king, which is pretty safe, Rossolimo's not so safe, in particular because of these overextended pawns on the king side. Okay, Fischer is going to be able to pry open Black's position with a timely h5, and who knows, maybe even a sacrifice. So Rossolimo probably feeling very insecure about his king at this stage in the game. He continues with development, bishop e6, also blockading this potentially dangerous pawn. And then Fischer comes up with a really nice positional maneuver for his knight, knight g1. His idea is to reroute this knight to the f4 square. Very often, to improve our knights, we have to take one step back before we can take 2 steps forward. And this is a great illustration of that concept. Once this knight lands on f4, it's going to put a lot of pressure on Black's kingside structure. King f7, knight h3, rook c8, rook g1, Fischer bringing the rook to the half-open g file to pressure the kingside. b6, and then Fischer plays pawn to h5, looking to pry open Black's position. Now, after Rossolimo gives a check on c3, Fischer just steps his king to the side on e2. Again, it's still completely safe. We reach a really critical position in the game. The game continuation saw knight c6. Okay, but the move Black really wants to play in this position is pawn to g5. Okay, pawn to g5 is highly desirable because it would keep the king side closed, which is what Black wants to do. Rossolimo does not want the g file or other lines being open towards his king. He wants to keep that sector of the board closed. The problem is, if Rossolimo had played g5 in this position, Fischer would have a great move. So pause your videos, try to find it. What would Fischer play to refute Rossolimo's play? So congratulations if you found a very intuitive sacrifice in this position. Knight takes g5, boom, blowing open the king position, and now Fischer would just be able to infiltrate on the g file. Queen f6 is an absolutely devastating check that's threatened on the next move. Black would be completely done for in this position. That's why Rossolimo played knight c6 and unfortunately had to accept this position where his king is just floundering about on the king side. We have rook a d1, Fischer activating his last piece. Knight takes, and then king f1. Okay, so Fischer's king's going for a little walk, but as we've discussed, because of Fischer's great central control, because of this great bishop on d3, his king is completely safe. Rook h8, rook g3, threatening a bunch of discoveries against the queen. That's why the knight retreats to c6 so that Black can play queen takes e5. And now Fischer brings the queen to h4. Okay, not only threatening a devastating check on f6, but also vacating the f4 square for this knight. Black captures here, and then we have knight f4. So Fischer's great positional maneuver has come to fruition. The knight has traveled from f3 to g1 to h3, now to f4 with devastating effect. After knight g4, Fischer eliminates this key defender, this bishop on e6. Without this bishop, which was really the glue holding Black's position together, bishop takes f5 is just the end of the world. The knight's hit, the rooks are skewered. Rossolimo gave a little spite check in this position, queen c4, but after king g1, decided to throw in the towel and resign. So what resistance could Black put up here, if any? Well, arguably the best move would be knight e3. Okay, Fischer's queen would be on prise in this position, but he can simply exchange, grab on e3, and he would be up a clean piece in this endgame and have a monster pass pawn on g6 to boot. So totally understandable why Rossolimo decided to resign in this position. So I hope you enjoyed the analysis. Don't forget, smash that subscribe button and join Team MVP. You're not going to want to miss my next installment, which will be game number 53. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.